It's inconceivable that 15 years have passed since the death of Don Knotts, the man who made audiences laugh so hard in the 1960s. In addition to his wit, Don's clean lifestyle won over the audiences. Fans were shocked today when Don's daughter Karen Knotts abruptly stood up to confirm professional speculations. Let's watch this film, which will provide you with information on every nuanced detail of Don Knotts' life and profession. But before starting this video, please hit the subscribe button for more informative videos. Born in Morgantown, West Virginia in 1924, Jess Donald Knotts experienced a difficult and traumatic upbringing. Writing on his early years, Andy and Don, The Making of a Friendship, and a classic American TV show, author Daniel DeVizet revealed a very problematic upbringing. Born by chance, Knotts was 14 years older than his closest sibling. Knotts had to sleep on a cot in the kitchen since his two older brothers shared their bedroom with a boarder, making his living situation less than ideal. By the time Knotts was born, his father, Jess Sr., a schizophrenic alcoholic with hysterical blindness, was essentially incapacitated. Jess Sr. battled mental health concerns in addition to his physical limitations. A somber constant throughout Knotts' early years was the abuse. He still vividly recalls one terrifying moment when his father threatened him with a knife. For young Knotts, navigating their home was especially upsetting due to its layout. He had to cross the living room, past the sofa where his father sat most of the time, in order to get from his kitchen bedroom to anywhere else. This trip frequently resulted in threats, which spread a generalized sense of danger and anxiety. By the age of 30, Knotts' mother, Elsie, confronted him about the traumatic experiences. Knotts suffered from constant fear and a frightening environment, which showed in his physical appearance. When he was a young boy, he was slender, pale, and frequently sick. In retrospect, Knotts said, "I did not come into the world with a great deal of promise." Undoubtedly, the misfortunes of Knotts' early years influenced his life's course and added to the difficulties he had when pursuing his career as a well-known performer. Being brothers-in-law, Daniel DeVizet, the author of Andy and Don, The Making of a Friendship, and a classic American TV show, had a touching personal relationship with Don Knotts. Through his investigation of Knotts' biography, DeVizet revealed the intricate relationships within Knotts' family, illuminating a difficult and tragic upbringing. Knotts had an unconventional relationship with his brothers, William Earl, nicknamed Shadow because of his thinness, and Sid. They were almost indistinguishable from the passing people who passed by their University Avenue house, according to DeVizet. The New York Times said that despite their humor, the family found it difficult to laugh in a life that had little to be happy about. The problems in the family went beyond quirkiness. Karen, Knotts' daughter, then disclosed to Closer Weekly that her father had been abused by his siblings. Their regular inebriation caused them to argue frequently, which inflamed tension and instability in the atmosphere. Knotts was left to deal with the loss when Shadow, the frail and humorous but asthmatic brother, died from an asthma attack. Undoubtedly, growing up in such a turbulent environment, full of strife and anxiety, had a significant impact on him during his adolescent years. Don Knotts had a strong desire to be happy, which influenced how he handled difficulties in his later years. Knotts found comfort in the world of imagination. He told the LA Review of Books that he was able to create a comfortable environment for himself by surrounding himself with made-up people that allowed him to act out happy and joyous events. This coping strategy revealed a heartfelt desire to flee the harsh reality of his childhood and find comfort in a fantasy world he had created. In Don Knotts' turbulent existence, his adolescent years were a pivotal time. Although he had experienced abuse and dread in his early years, as he approached puberty, a ray of hope began to appear. When his father died when he was 13, the weight of fear was lifted. This crucial turning point lessened the horrors that had plagued Knotts at home and gave him some control over his problematic family dynamics, particularly with his other brother. As stated by his daughter Karen, Knotts underwent a metamorphosis during this time. He experienced a significant transformation once he started high school. Karen said her father had just blossomed to Closer Weekly. He acquired popularity, was elected class president, wrote a column for the yearbook, and for the first time, he had a best friend. He was able to thrive outside of his house since he was freed from its stifling environment. But Knotts' view of his youth was different from his success on the outside. In an interview with the Los Angeles Times in 1976, he disclosed a more profound and inward conflict. Knotts described being miserable for a large portion of his childhood and acknowledged feeling like a loser despite his accomplishments. His unhappiness was exacerbated by the family's financial difficulties as well as his displeasure with his stature. In a most unlikely place, with a friend named Danny, Don Knotts found comfort and a creative outlet during this trying time. But Danny was a ventriloquist's dummy, not a human buddy. This dummy was Knotts' first performance tool when he started his career in entertainment. Through the technique of ventriloquism, he found a method to express himself and find meaning in the face of personal suffering. His fortune in the entertainment industry would ultimately be paved with this early performance experience. Snopes dispels the popular and somewhat cruel claim that Don Knotts was an extremely severe drill instructor for the Marine Corps. This tale is one of many urban legends that make up improbable military histories for famous people who don't fit the normal mold. It's similar to the baseless theory that Mr. Rogers was a military sharpshooter. Knotts actually served in the military during World War II. Even though he was thought to be malnourished and ill, he was admitted to the Army. According to the New York Times, Knotts made a name for himself on the Pacific Front as a member of the comedic troupe Stars and Griffith, which was tasked with the vital duty of providing entertainment for the troops. In addition, he demonstrated his adaptability and commitment to aiding the wartime endeavors by taking on the position of nurse when necessary. While still performing with his ventriloquist dummy Danny, Knotts attracted the attention of an elderly comedian called Red Ford while serving in the military. Years later, Knotts recalled that Ford had said something that had stuck with him. "You know something, you're a funny little son of a BOS." When Knotts got out of the Army, he started doing various kinds of humor instead of ventriloquism. Appalachian Talk describes a pivotal event that happened at this time when Knotts threw Danny, the ventriloquist's dummy, off a ship somewhere in the South Pacific. This performance signaled a sea change in Knotts' humorous trajectory, a new phase in his career, and a growth as a performer. Following his time in the armed forces and his 1948 education degree from West Virginia University. According to the LA Times, Don Knotts only had $100 when he left for New York City. His first attempt at breaking into the entertainment business was met with rejection. He was turned down for several radio appearances. Even though he eventually got a job on a soap opera, his career didn't take off until 7 years later when he was cast on Broadway. Andy Griffith became Knotts' co-star and lifelong buddy on Broadway. Their reunion was sparked by the comedy No Time for Sergeants. Knotts' career path was significantly shaped by this partnership. Knotts rapidly established herself as the perfect actor for a certain kind of role, a figure who was apprehensive, tense, and unthreatening. The New York Times claimed that Knotts possessed a special talent for material theft and that, strangely, most of the people he took from were receptive to it. This was due to Knotts' nervous manner, diminutive stature, and thin frame, which made him the ideal comic foil and made other male performers in comics seem more macho in contrast. According to the N, Knotts had a talent for elevating everyone he performed with to the level of leading men. This quality would come to define his humorous image and play a major role in his success in the entertainment business. Even after becoming a television celebrity, Don Knotts struggled greatly behind the scenes. Knotts himself first suggested to Andy Griffith that he played Barney Fife on The Andy Griffith Show, albeit in a quite innocuous way. But this accidental suggestion turned out to be a match made in television heaven, catapulting Don Knotts to a degree of fame that many would-be actors and comedians could only imagine. But there was always a looming threat of personal difficulties in his life. Long before she graced the small screen with Griffith, Knotts struggled with crippling feelings of inferiority, according to writer Daniel Davis, as published by the Charlotte Observer. His self-doubt was so severe that he may lie in bed for days on end before a performance. Due to the severity of his emotional problems in the 1950s, doctors began prescribing anti-anxiety medications to Knotts, which ultimately resulted in an addiction. He fought chronic sleeplessness and hypochondria, which were woven into the fabric of his anxieties. According to Davis, who was quoted by the LA Review of Books, Knott's tendency to stay out late and enjoy the company of many ladies was partly to blame for his insomnia. Davis also pointed out that despite these difficulties, Knotts was able to give up his vices suddenly and very quickly. But an accidental sleeping drug overdose and an ultimatum from his third wife marked a turning point in his life. Knotts changed his behaviors and gave his lifestyle a second look as a result of this incident. Even with his enormous success, Don Knotts struggled with a terrible inner conflict. Knotts' effort to reconcile his on-screen identities with his real life was a major factor in this conflict, as author Daniel Davis of the LA Review of Books details. As a result of his habit of playing timid, apprehensive, and frequently ridiculed roles, he was placed in an ironic position where he was able to achieve extraordinary success while simultaneously projecting images of his own insecurities. According to Davis, Knotts went to a Hollywood therapist's office at one time in his career to find comfort, hoping to overcome self-doubt, despair, and his father's Bible-thumping influence. Knotts suddenly started yelling, "F you, God." This tremendous emotional outburst highlights the depth of his inner conflict and the nuanced relationship he had with his own achievement. Karen, Knotts' daughter, sheds light on her father's volatile personality. She talks about his struggles with depression and how she tried to help him get through the difficult mental cycles that sent him into downward spirals. Karen observes that in spite of the difficult journey, her father had triumphed over the numerous obstacles that beset his existence. She stressed that at the end of the day, he had a true love for people and took satisfaction in his attempts to foster happiness. A number of events culminated in Don Knotts' departure from the Andy Griffith Show, which was a major turning point in his career. His daughter Karen claims that he decided to resign because of the show's unwavering demands and how grueling the labor was. "There's only so many stories you can tell," she said, underscoring the difficulties facing the sector. But according to the LA Times, Knotts had only intended to commit to 5 seasons of the show from the beginning, and he left the series in 1967 as planned. Knotts stated in an interview with the Los Angeles Times that his decision to change his focus was primarily due to the demanding nature of television production. He clarified, "The grind gets to you in television, and that's primarily the reason I'm concentrating on pictures." Knotts maintained his friendly relationship with Andy Griffith by making sporadic guest appearances on the show even after leaving. See what happened after Knotts' departure. The general consensus was that the Andy Griffith Show lost the unique appeal and chemistry that the charismatic pair of Griffith and Knotts brought to the screen, even though it went on without him. Without Knotts, the show started to feel like just another program on the 1960s television schedule. Unfortunately, Don Knotts' movie career did not turn out to be as successful as he had intended. After leaving television, Knotts signed a 5-film agreement with Universal Pictures. Knotts did not receive the critical recognition he anticipated at the time, despite the fact that movies like The Incredible Mr. Limpet, The Reluctant Astronaut, and The Ghost and Mr. Chicken are today regarded as brilliant classics. When it came to making the move from television to film, Knotts struggled to reach the kind of popularity he had imagined, despite their eventual recognition and effect on comedians like Jim Carrey and Martin Short. Don Knotts' tragically unrealized potential overshadows his later career phases and his innovative contributions to the entertainment industry. Don Knotts' life took a fatal turn when, at the age of 57, he was given the depressing diagnosis of macular degeneration. According to the Mayo Clinic, this crippling ailment causes distortion or blurring of objects in the direct line of sight for the individual experiencing it. Sometimes it can even get to the point where it becomes difficult to recognize faces, which is an issue that gets worse over time. Deep emotional struggles ensued as Knotts faced the hard reality of his illness. In a forthright admission of this trying time, he told the New York Times that "I got pretty depressed for a while, and then one day I said to myself, I bet a blind person would give his right arm to have the vision I have." This moving contemplation portrays the inner agony he had while he dealt with the severe effects of macular degeneration on his once vigorous vision. Despite the psychological cost, Knotts showed remarkable perseverance by carrying on with his labor, displaying resilience. The American Macular Degeneration Foundation observed that he continued to swim laps, his favorite activity. But the condition's unrelenting advancement eventually took a toll. His vision worsened to the point where performing daily tasks became quite difficult. Among the casualties of this dismal fall were reading and driving. Following the surge in popularity of variety shows, the Don Knotts Show emerged as a bold endeavor for the celebrated actor in the entertainment industry. This was an opportunity that followed Knotts' exit from the beloved The Andy Griffith Show, which debuted in 1970 and initially looked like a hit program. But soon, the hard truth of the show's lackluster reception would eclipse the optimism around it. In the midst of the thriving variety show period, NBC launched The Don Knotts Show with the ambitious goal of drawing viewers in. According to MeTV, the network gave the show a big 22-week run to make an impression since they thought it would be a huge smash. But even with that initial potential, the show had serious obstacles to overcome. Don Knotts noted the intense competition in the variety show business that season as he thought back on the experience. "We did all kinds of things," he disclosed. "Everybody and his brother had a variety show that season, so there was a lot of competition for variety." Complexity was increased by the network politics, as Knotts had practically been taken from CBS, the original home of the Andy Griffith Show. This change didn't sit well, but many people were too optimistic about the show's potential to see its possible drawbacks. The director of the Andy Griffith Show, Bob Sweeney, was brought in as part of the efforts to rescue the situation. Notable additions included the debut of acts like the Carpenters and the recurrent sketch comedy character Gary Burhoff from May's *Age. In spite of these efforts, the destiny of the play tragically changed, leading to an early conclusion, following the cancellation of it. While Don Knotts remained a fixture on other variety shows, the debacle of his own show was a dark period in his career. In the erratic world of television, where even the most promising candidates can stumble in the face of fierce competition and unanticipated obstacles, the Don Knotts Show offers as a sobering lesson. Don Knotts lost his life to lung cancer in the early 2000s, according to a depressing article from Closer Weekly. Though it had grown a little strained by then, his long-standing friendship with Andy Griffith was strengthened throughout this trying period. Andy Griffith raced to Knotts' aid and remained by his side during the disease's unrelenting assault. Their co-star from the TV show Matlock, Nancy Stafford, reminisced about the incredible reunion, saying that the two pals felt as though no time had passed. They developed a rhythm of singing, laughing, and joke-telling that brought them closer together in a heartfelt and joyful way. Stafford highlighted the remarkable communication between them, calling their exchange hysterical. Unfortunately, Don Knotts lost his fight with lung cancer in the end. Karen Knotts, his daughter, shared details about her father's last moments with her in 2020, 14 years after his passing. In an interview with Closer Weekly, she shared a bittersweet memory of those trying times. Even with the seriousness of his illness, Knotts never lost his sense of humor. Karen remembered the touching incident where her father made them laugh, even in the face of death, with his impromptu and innately humorous quips. But as she and her stepmother started laughing, Karen said with profound sadness that she had left her father's side. Director Howard Storm was moved by her heartfelt detail and encouraged her to remain, laugh heartily, and let her father know how happy she was. Thinking back on this counsel, Karen regretted not being there for her father to witness the joy he had brought even to his last hours. On February 24, 2006, legendary actor Don Knotts, known for his comedic genius, passed away. People magazine described the heartbreaking scene of his last minutes, pointing out that his lifelong buddy Andy Griffith was one of the very last people to sit by his bedside. With a heavy heart, Griffith held Knotts' hand and shared his final moments with him, showing his devotion. Griffith shared a poignant memory, saying, "I held his hand and told him I loved him. I think he heard my voice since his chest heaved multiple times." Despite quitting smoking decades before to his diagnosis, Knotts showed incredible fortitude and hopefulness in the face of his lung cancer diagnosis. Despite receiving such a dire prognosis, he never lost hope or optimism. His choice to keep his children in the dark about his chemotherapy treatments is one noteworthy component of his strategy. He continued to live as though the diagnosis was only a small roadblock in the path, and he never wavered in his optimism that he would recover from the sickness. Don Knotts' official cause of death was listed as problems related to his lungs and respiratory system. According to reports, he had been dealing with undisclosed health issues that caused events to be canceled in the years prior. The difficulties he encountered in his later years were further obscured by the fact that the specifics of his health issues were kept under wraps. Those closest to Don Knotts recalled him with great respect upon his death. In his reflections on their long acquaintance, Andy Griffith described Knotts as quiet, unassuming, and extraordinarily intelligent. According to the collective memories of those who knew him best, Don Knotts was a man whose warmth, humility, and comedic brilliance left an indelible mark on the hearts of those who had the privilege of sharing his journey. Ron Howard, another cherished colleague, paid tribute to Knotts as just one of those truly kind people. There are rumors that Don Knotts led a colorful personal life marked by 3 marriages. His first marriage, which lasted for 17 years, was with Catherine Metz in 1947. The couple had a son named Thomas and a daughter named Karen. In the end, the pair broke up in 1964. Relentlessly overcoming the difficulties of marriage, Knotts entered into a second union with Laura Lazur, which lasted from 1974 to 1983. Even with the difficulties, his amorous adventure continued. His lasting love affair was with Frances Yarborough. They were committed to one another from the time of their 2002 vow exchange until Don's death in 2006. Fans and colleagues in the industry praised Knotts for his captivating charm, which was evident in both his personal and professional life. He was bestowed with a star on the esteemed Hollywood Walk of Fame in 2000, a recognition of his continuing influence in the entertainment industry. Love for Knotts went beyond the glamour of Hollywood. Morgantown, West Virginia, commissioned artist Jim Lester to create a sculpture in his likeness as a heartfelt homage to their hometown hero. The sculpture, which was unveiled in 2016, serves as a constant reminder of the joy and humor that Don Knotts contributed to the world. Knotts' legacy lives on, both in the center of his city and on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, despite the difficulties of his personal life. What are your thoughts on the reports regarding Don Knotts' life that his daughter has confirmed? Post your thoughts in the space provided below. We really hope this video has been useful to you. Remember to subscribe to the channel, share, and give a like if you enjoy the content. I appreciate you viewing, and I hope to see you in the upcoming videos. I'm going to miss you.